In today's video, we dive into one of the most controversial truths rarely discussed openly: the United States' long-standing strategy of regime change. Professor Jeffrey Sachs lays out with extraordinary clarity how Washington has relied on toppling governments for decades, using intelligence influence, diplomatic pressure, and covert operations. This isn't about left or right, it's about understanding a pattern that has shaped global politics, from Latin America to the Middle East to Eastern Europe, and how it continues to destabilize entire regions while claiming to promote democracy. If you've ever wondered why certain conflicts never end, or why the same countries repeatedly fall into chaos, this interview gives us the answer.
How influential is the CIA in the operations of the U.S. government?
Definitely in many, many places, it is the instrument of regime change.
Yes.
And the U.S. is the only country in the world that relies on regime change as, I would say, the lead diplomatic, let me put it a different way, not diplomatic, as the lead foreign policy instrument. In other words, most countries, virtually any small country, any middle power country, when it doesn't like another country, it either has to deal with it or it comes begging to the United States to take out that country. And we are the country that makes a living by overthrowing other governments. And that's not a good vocation for us. It almost always ends in disaster, in bloodshed, in continued instability. But that's the job of the CIA. It's half the job of the CIA. The CIA is also an intelligence agency. It collects information and makes analysis, and it gives intelligence findings. And I have no problem with that role at all, although I don't want them to spy on us. But I think that making intelligence findings for the U.S. government is necessary. But being a private army or a hidden force that overthrows governments, that stokes unrest, that puts people in power, that runs covert operations, I'm against it.
So if a big part of the CIA's job is taking down leaders of foreign countries, how long before it does that here in the United States? I mean, it doesn't seem unlikely that, why wouldn't they do that here?
Yeah, probably 61 years ago was their first run at this with President Kennedy. I think it's best guess, not sure, but best guess that this was at least maybe rogue CIA or maybe official CIA, right, or maybe compartmentalized CIA operation. It was clearly someone's operation, not Lee Harvey Oswald's.
That's pretty obvious.
All we know. And all of the evidence points in that direction. It used to be said, why is the United States the only country in the world that's never had a coup? And the answer was, well, we're the only country that doesn't have a U.S. embassy.
Well, of course, we've had a coup. I mean, murdering the president is a coup.
But we probably had a coup in broad daylight on November 22nd, 1963. And we never quite got over it. And we never looked into it. On the contrary, we covered it up from the beginning. And drip by drip, evidence comes, including the most recent evidence that magic bullet, which was one of the justifications of the absurd account of a lone gunman, was also debunked by the, I think now 88-year-old Secret Service agent who said, I actually put that bullet from the back of Kennedy's seat in the limousine on the stretcher at Parkland Hospital. So there's so many things wrong with the official. I mean, it's preposterous. Almost nobody believes it or should believe it. But it's also interesting for all that we're discussing. Most likely it was a government coup in broad daylight with a tremendous amount of evidence that it was a conspiracy at a high level. And yet it passed for the last 61 years without any official practical note of that fact.
Do you think that was the last time the CIA tried to influence domestic politics in this country?
Well, I'm sure the CIA influences domestic politics all the time in this country, because we know about extensive surveillance operations. But it's interesting. Next year will be the 50th anniversary of the Church Committee hearings.
Yes.
And Frank Church was a very unusual figure from Idaho, a pretty staunch Republican state, and he was a young, gifted patriot whose favorite senator was Bora, a conservative Republican senator. And he was just an upright, very decent person who saw more and more, my God, it's the things we're talking about. Something's not right. People are getting assassinated in other countries. Our government, it doesn't look clean. And one thing after another in a series of events led him to chair the only time a Senate investigative committee actually looked deeply into CIA operations. That was 1975. Fascinating. What made it possible was just a confluence of events. Nixon had resigned. Ford was an unelected president who came from Congress, who didn't want to take on Congress, so he didn't resist Church's investigation, even though his chief of staff, Dick Cheney, was telling him, "Go after this guy. We got to crush this investigation." But Ford said, no, we can't. And anyway, Supreme Court, and I don't want to get into another huge fight. Hoover had died. J. Edgar Hoover had died in 1972, I believe. So the FBI couldn't resist the same way. Bill Colby had become CIA director, and he didn't want to inherit all the shit from the past CIA. So there came this one moment when all these pieces enabled actually someone to look into what this organization was doing. And the first thing they discovered was no one had ever looked into any of it before. Nothing.
No.
Second, they discovered this is an army of the President of the United States.
Yes.
This is a private army. And they debated, is it a rogue army? Does it do it on its own? Or is it an army of the president? But it's an army. And it's an army completely outside of our oversight and control. Then the third thing they found is they're assassinating lots of people. They're assassinating Americans, by the way, through these unbelievably crazed LSD experiments.
Yes.
But they, basically... they weren't the ones to put the bullet through the head of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, but they tried, and they supported the overthrow of Lumumba, and of course they were trying to kill Castro and many other things. So they found unbelievable things. Now that was 1975. Since then, we're 49 years. There's never been another Church Committee of its kind. It's unbelievable how many things have happened since then. The list, believe me, is very, very long. I've seen some of it so directly, I can't, it's just shocking to me, but just an insight into how our country works, which you know very well. But to me, I find it so weird. I was asked to help Aristide in Haiti.
Yes.
Okay. Haiti's, so poor, so unstable, so desperate. And Aristide asked me for economic help. That's what I do. That's my expertise. So I flew down to Port-au-Prince, and I had a very good meeting with him. And at the end of the meeting, he said, Mr. Sachs, they're going to take me out. They're going to take me out. And what do you mean? He said, they're going to overthrow me. Okay, sorry to be so naive as I am. I said, no, we're going to make this work. We're going to make this work. No, they're going to take me out. I said, no, I'm going back to Washington. We're going to help with the Inter-American Development Bank and World Bank and IMF. And, I'm so naive. So, of course, then they decide to take him out. And the way they do it is destabilize the country. So the first thing is close down the IMF, close down the World Bank, close down the Inter-American Development Bank, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. The next thing is you send in some mercenaries who are going to create trouble, come over the border from Dominican Republic. The last thing was rather remarkable, which was the U.S. ambassador showed up at his door literally one day and said, Mr. President, you have to flee. We have a plane waiting for you. Otherwise, your life is in danger. And they led him to a plane with an unmarked tail. And 23 hours later, he was in Central African Republic. So this is what's called a coup in broad daylight.
Central African Republic.
Absolutely.
I thought he went to Joburg. I don't know why.
No. He went afterwards, but the landing was Central African Republic, if I remember correctly.
The message from this interview is unmistakable. Regime change is a failed doctrine. It produces instability, suffering, and endless war. Sachs offers a rare, honest perspective, one that challenges the mainstream narrative and forces us to rethink how global politics actually works. If we want peace, the world needs diplomacy, not domination. And until this mindset changes, the consequences will continue to be felt by millions of ordinary people across the globe.